Have you ever felt that the moment you start searching for truth, life seems to turn against you? That when you begin to awaken, strange forces appear, testing, confusing, and draining your spirit? What if this isn't coincidence at all, but a reaction from ancient entities that have always feared your awakening? For thousands of years, hidden texts whispered about invisible rulers of this world, the Archons, beings who feed not on flesh, but on your ignorance and fear. They are not mere symbols or myths. For the ancient Gnostics, they were the true jailers of human consciousness. And the moment you begin to see beyond the illusion, they move against you, subtly, silently, through thoughts, emotions, and circumstances meant to drag you back into spiritual sleep. But why? Why would awakening threaten them so deeply? What truth could be so dangerous that entire generations were erased to prevent it from being remembered? Today, we will uncover that secret. We will follow the trail of forbidden knowledge that the church tried to bury, that empires erased from their scriptures, and that secret societies only dared to whisper about. If you've ever felt that there's something wrong with this world, something artificial, something that doesn't quite fit, and what you're about to hear may finally explain why. Stay until the end, because the last revelation will not only expose how the Archons operate, it will show you how to free yourself from their grip. And before we begin this descent into the hidden layers of reality, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and join our community of seekers, those who no longer accept the surface version of truth. Because once you know what you're about to learn, there's no turning back. The ancient Gnostics believed that our universe is not a harmonious creation, but a cosmic counterfeit, a flawed copy built by a false god. They called this being the Demiurge, and the invisible powers that served him were the Archons, the rulers, the controllers, the architects of illusion. According to the Nag Hammadi texts discovered in Egypt in 1945, these entities were not merely metaphors, but living intelligences that govern the material world, feeding off the confusion and suffering of humanity. Imagine this. You are a fragment of divine light, fallen into a world that constantly distracts you with fear and endless desires. The Gnostics said this wasn't accidental. It was designed that way. The Archon's mission was to keep the divine spark trapped in matter, bound by the illusions of time, ego, and identity. Every time a soul began to awaken and remember its true origin, these rulers would send obstacles, chaos, doubt, conflict to pull it back down. Some scholars interpret these Archons as psychological parasites, thought forms that infiltrate the human mind, twisting perception and emotion. Others see them as cosmic intelligences, entities existing in dimensions close to ours, manipulating frequencies and consciousness itself. The truth may lie somewhere in between, both inner and outer, both spiritual and psychological. But here's what all traditions agree on. Awakening is dangerous, not because it brings evil, but because it threatens control. From ancient Babylon to Rome, those who dared to question the order of the world were silenced. The Gnostic schools were burned, their manuscripts hidden or destroyed, their followers labeled heretics. Yet fragments survived, buried in jars, sealed for centuries until humanity was ready again. And now, here you are, listening, searching, remembering. That's why, when you begin to awaken, resistance appears. The Archons do not attack the asleep. They only react when the light stirs. Have you ever noticed that as soon as you decide to change your life, to live with more awareness, to seek truth, everything suddenly becomes harder? That is the echo of the same war that began before time itself, the war for human consciousness. So the question is, who are these Archons really? Are they demons, gods, or something else entirely? In the next revelation, we'll trace their origins, from the Gnostic scriptures to the shadows of modern power systems, to understand why awakening threatens their dominion. According to the Gnostics, everything began with a mistake, not a sin, not an act of evil, but a cosmic error. In the beginning, there was only the source, a pure and infinite light they called the pleroma, the fullness of divine energy. From this light came many divine beings called eons who lived in harmony with the source. But one eon, named Sophia, meaning wisdom, wanted to create something on her own without her divine counterpart. Out of her deep desire to know the unknown, something unexpected was born, a being that lacked light, a distorted creation. That being was the Demiurge. The Demiurge looked around and saw nothing but darkness. Thinking he was the only God, he declared, "I am the only one. There is no other beside me." That's how ignorance began. From this false belief, he created the material universe, the world we live in, as a reflection of divine creation, but without its original perfection. To maintain control over it, he made helpers, the Archons, rulers of the planets, stars, and human systems. The Gnostics said the Archons were not physical creatures, but invisible forces that shape thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. They influence people through systems of power, through fear, through the constant pressure to obey, and to forget who we truly are. Their greatest victory is to make humans believe that this material world is all there is. Now, imagine Sophia watching what her mistake had created. She did not hate her creation. She pitied it. So she sent a spark of her divine light into the human soul, giving us the power to remember our true home. That light is what the Archons fear most, because when we remember, their control begins to fade. This is why, when a person starts to awaken, strange resistance appears, confusion, fatigue, even emotional chaos. It's not punishment. It's the reaction of the system that tries to keep you asleep. What do you think? Could it be that the struggles you face when you begin to seek truth are not coincidences, but signs that something or someone doesn't want you to wake up? In the next block, we'll explore how the Archons hide in our world today, behind institutions, systems, and even personal beliefs, and how ancient knowledge tried to warn us before it was erased. If the Archons are not visible beings, how do they continue to influence humanity after thousands of years? The Gnostics said they act through systems, through everything that shapes human thought, emotion, and behavior. They don't need to appear with wings or horns. They operate quietly, through structures of control that make people forget their inner light. Look around. The modern world is full of distractions. Every second, we are told what to desire, what to fear, what to believe, and what to ignore. The Gnostics would say this constant noise is the Archon's perfect creation, a prison without visible walls. They keep the mind busy and the heart disconnected. We wake up, rush to work, scroll endlessly through screens, compare ourselves to others, and rarely stop to ask, who am I really? Why am I here? The ancient texts describe how the Archons influenced the rulers of the earth, using ambition, greed, and power to expand their dominion. Today, those same forces are present in politics, media, and even organized religion, not necessarily through evil people, but through the same energy of domination and fear that has existed since the beginning. Every time a system teaches people to obey blindly instead of seeking truth within themselves, the Archons win. Some scholars believe the Gnostic vision of the Archons was not about supernatural demons, but about psychological patterns that enslave humanity. Think of them as energies of control, envy, arrogance, hatred, guilt. They take different forms in different ages. In ancient times, they wore the masks of empires. Today, they wear the masks of consumerism, social pressure, and digital addiction. The system rewards those who sleep and resists those who question. But there's a deeper layer to this. In Gnostic teachings, the Archons were also said to manipulate the astral planes, the invisible dimensions of thought and emotion. They feed on lower vibrations, fear, shame, anger. Every time a human being falls into despair, it's like feeding the matrix that keeps the illusion alive. And this is why awakening feels like a battle. You are literally pulling your light out of their reach. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that when you start to meditate, pray sincerely, or seek silence, distractions multiply? People disturb you. Memories resurface. Emotions become stronger. It's as if the world itself is pushing back. The Gnostics would say, the Archons have noticed. Even major spiritual figures across history hinted at this war. Jesus spoke of the ruler of this world, who blinds minds. Paul, in his letters, mentioned the powers and principalities of the air. In Buddhism, similar forces were called Mara, the tempter who tries to keep the mind in illusion. Different names, same essence. The invisible resistance that appears the moment a human starts to remember who they are. But this is not a reason to fear. It's proof that awakening is real. The system reacts only when something within you begins to change. That means you're touching truth. Now, imagine if millions began to awaken at once, to stop feeding fear and start living from awareness. The Archons' web would weaken because their power depends entirely on human energy. That's the revelation the ancient world tried to erase, that liberation doesn't come from fighting them, but from remembering what they can't touch, the divine spark within. In the next part, we'll uncover how this forbidden knowledge was erased and distorted, and why generations were kept ignorant of their own power. When we read the ancient Gnostic texts, one question always rises. Why did this knowledge disappear for so long? The answer is simple and tragic. It was not lost by chance. It was silenced, piece by piece, until almost no one remembered that a completely different vision of creation once existed. In the first centuries after Christ, many spiritual movements coexisted. Some followed the teachings that later became Christianity. Others, the Gnostics, believed that the true message of the Christ was inner awakening, a direct connection with the divine spark inside every person, without needing temples or priests. To them, salvation was not obedience, but knowledge, gnosis, the remembrance of one's divine origin. But this message was dangerous to those building power structures. If every human could connect directly with the divine, who would need an institution to mediate that contact? The church that was forming under the Roman Empire saw this as a threat, so began a slow and deliberate process of suppression. Gnostic writings were labeled heresy. Their teachers were exiled, imprisoned, or killed. Their books were burned, their communities scattered. By the year 400, nearly all Gnostic schools had vanished from public life. Only the official version of Christianity, controlled, centralized, and politically aligned, survived. The words demiurge and archons were erased from teachings. Sophia, the divine feminine, was reduced to a symbol or forgotten entirely. Humanity was told that it was born sinful, not divine, that it must obey authority to reach heaven, not awaken within to find it. For more than 1,000 years, this alternative vision remained buried, literally. Then, in 1945, near the Egyptian village of Nag Hammadi, a farmer discovered a clay jar containing 13 papyrus books. Inside were the secret Gospels of the Gnostics, the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Philip, and many others. They spoke of the hidden knowledge of the soul, the illusion of the material world, and the invisible rulers who enslaved mankind through ignorance. The discovery shocked the world. It revealed that early Christians had never agreed on a single truth, that there were many voices, many visions, and the one that survived was not necessarily the most divine, but the most politically useful. Some scholars believe the destruction of Gnosticism was the greatest spiritual loss in history, because if people had continued to cultivate inner knowledge instead of external obedience, human consciousness might have evolved very differently. We might have built civilizations based on wisdom, not fear, on inner authority, not control. And yet, nothing truly disappears. The light of Sophia hides, but never dies. The same knowledge that the Archons feared, the idea that you are divine light, trapped but never extinguished, is rising again today. That's why you are hearing this now. But the question remains, if the Archons were the invisible rulers of the past, where do they rule now? Have they vanished, or have they simply changed their masks, using modern systems to keep humans distracted and divided? In the next revelation, we'll trace how the ancient control structures evolved into the invisible mechanisms of the present age. The Gnostics described the Archons as invisible rulers that manipulate perception and feed on human confusion. If that was true 2,000 years ago, what would they look like today in a world of screens, data, and noise? Their methods may have changed, but their purpose remains the same: to keep the human mind distracted, divided, and asleep. In ancient times, the Archons acted through kings, priests, and empires. Today they act through algorithms, corporations, and information systems that shape how we think, what we feel, and even what we believe is true. We no longer bow before stone idols. We scroll before glowing ones. Every image, every click, every opinion carefully reinforced until our inner voice is lost beneath a sea of noise. The Gnostics would see this not as progress, but as a perfect illusion, a cage that no longer needs bars. Notice how the modern world teaches us to look outward for everything: approval, love, validation, meaning. It tells us that happiness comes from what we buy, what we achieve, or how we appear. This is how the Archons work now, not by punishing the body, but by exhausting the soul. They have turned the human mind into their temple, filling it with endless desires, fears, and comparisons. The Archons no longer whisper from the heavens. They speak through our devices. They shape collective emotion through constant exposure to fear, outrage, and division. They don't need to enslave anyone physically. They only need to keep consciousness fragmented. When you are anxious, reactive, or addicted to distraction, you produce the energy they crave: confusion, anger, hopelessness. But the Gnostic vision offers a way out, not through rebellion, but through awareness. When you observe how your thoughts are pulled by fear or desire, you begin to see the pattern. When you step back from the endless noise and look within, even for a moment, you weaken their grip. The Archons cannot hold what they cannot deceive. Some spiritual teachers say that humanity is now in the same situation as in the first centuries, once again awakening after long spiritual sleep. And as more people awaken, the system reacts. More fear, more chaos, more division. But this reaction only proves that the awakening is real. Have you noticed how much fear surrounds spiritual freedom today? How quickly genuine curiosity is labeled as crazy, dangerous, or conspiratorial? That's not accidental. It's the same defense mechanism that silenced the Gnostics. The Archons thrive when truth is mocked, because ridicule keeps seekers silent. And yet, you're still here, watching, listening, remembering. That is already an act of resistance. Every moment of self-awareness, every breath of clarity, is a victory in the hidden war for consciousness. In the next revelation, we'll go deeper into how to recognize the Archon's influence in your personal life, in thoughts, emotions, relationships, and daily struggles, and how the ancient Gnostics taught that liberation begins not in the world, but inside your own mind. For the Gnostics, the true battlefield was never out there in the world, it was within. The Archons were not only external forces that manipulated empires and systems. They were also energies that entered the human psyche, whispering in our thoughts, shaping our emotions, and molding our reactions. They are the invisible voices that tell you, you are not enough, you will fail. You are just a body, a name, a role. They are the invisible hands that feed your guilt, your self-doubt, your fear of rejection. The ancient texts taught that the Archons could not create anything new. They could only imitate, distort, and confuse. They copied divine creation like a shadow copies the body that casts it. And in the same way, the Archons copy your divine spark by creating false identities, the ego, the mask you wear to survive in this world of illusion. They make you believe that you are your thoughts, your possessions, your fears, or your wounds. And once you identify with those illusions, they no longer need to control you from outside. You begin to control yourself on their behalf. Think about it. How many times have you felt a deep intuition, a quiet inner voice telling you the truth? But then, almost instantly, another louder voice appears, full of logic, fear, or shame, convincing you to ignore it. The Gnostics would say that first voice is your divine spark, Sophia's light, and the second voice is the echo of the Archons. Their strategy is not to attack you directly, but to drown the signal of your soul in noise. Every human being carries this battle within. It's not about good and evil as we often imagine, but about truth versus illusion. The Archons rule the world of illusion, Maya, as the Eastern traditions call it, while the spark within you belongs to the world of truth, the pleroma. When you live through awareness, compassion, and silence, you nourish that spark. When you live in reaction, judgment, or hatred, you feed the Archons. Some scholars interpret the Gnostic idea of casting off the Archons as psychological liberation, freeing oneself from the inner voices of fear and conformity. In simple words, every time you act from awareness instead of impulse, you weaken them. Every time you choose forgiveness over resentment, or silence over gossip, or truth over convenience, something in their invisible web breaks. But this is not easy. Awakening often feels like chaos, because the Archons react fiercely when their influence is threatened. People who begin to awaken frequently describe sudden emotional storms, doubts, or conflicts appearing out of nowhere. That's not madness. It's the cleansing of layers that were never yours. The system shakes because your light is pushing through. The Apocryphon of John, one of the main Gnostic texts, describes how the soul must pass through the realms ruled by the Archons after death, each one demanding recognition, each one trying to deceive. But it also says that when the soul knows its true origin, the Archons lose their power, for they can only command the ignorant. This wasn't only about the afterlife. It was a metaphor for spiritual life here and now. Knowledge of self is liberation from control. In the modern world, this journey through the Archons happens daily. When you face envy, pride, greed, despair, those are not just emotions. They are small Archons testing your awareness. The question is not whether they appear, but whether you identify with them. If you say, "I am angry," you've become their host. But if you say, "Anger is passing through me," you remain the observer, untouchable. The Archons cannot possess a consciousness that watches itself. The Gnostics practiced inner observation as a sacred act, what we might call mindfulness today. They trained themselves to remain alert to every thought, every emotion, every subtle manipulation of the ego. Their goal was not perfection, but remembrance, to remember that they were light passing through illusion. They used symbols, meditations, and sacred sounds to realign with Sophia's wisdom, the voice of the divine feminine that whispers from within the heart. Sophia, they said, is the antidote to the Archons. Where they create confusion, she brings clarity. Where they impose fear, she offers compassion. And she lives within every soul that seeks truth. The feminine energy that the world forgot is precisely the energy that dissolves the power of control. That's why so many spiritual systems suppressed her image, because she represented direct inner knowing, not external obedience. To defeat the Archons, the Gnostics didn't fight with weapons or rituals of domination. They practiced awareness, silence, and self-knowledge. They observed their thoughts without identifying with them. They turned inward until the outer world lost its hypnotic power. This was their gnosis, their sacred science of awakening. And what does this mean for you, here and now? It means that every challenge, every emotional storm, every doubt is not a punishment, but an opportunity to wake up. When you notice how your mind reacts, you are already awakening. When you question your own reactions instead of blaming others, you're stepping out of the matrix. You may ask, but how do I know if the Archons are influencing me? The answer is simple. Notice when you feel disconnected from peace. Notice when your mind becomes obsessed, jealous, fearful, or addicted to approval. Notice when your energy feels drained after consuming certain information or spending time in certain environments. The Archons feed through emotion. Awareness starves them. The first step is observation. The second is choice. Once you see their influence, you must choose light, not through effort, but through presence. Every conscious breath is an act of rebellion. Every moment of gratitude is a spark of liberation. Remember, you are not fighting them in the outer world. You are remembering who you are inside. The Gnostics said that when a soul becomes aware of its divine origin, the Archons tremble, not because the soul attacks them, but because they can no longer deceive it. Awareness burns away illusion. So, what if the spiritual war humanity faces is not a war of nations, but of perception? What if every time you awaken, you weaken the invisible network that has held this world in confusion for ages? Maybe that's why the Archons fear the awakening of a single human, because a single awakened soul becomes a mirror that reflects truth back into the illusion, cracking it open from within. And perhaps that's also why you're here, listening to this message. Something inside you remembers, not intellectually, but deeply, that this world is not your origin, that the light within you is older than the stars. The Archons can manipulate matter, but they cannot touch that light. In the next and final revelation, we will bring everything together. You will see how all these fragments, the hidden history, the cosmic error, the modern systems of control, and the inner battle, form one great secret about human destiny. And you will understand why the Gnostics said, when you know yourself, you will be known. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when the war ends, not because the Archons have disappeared, but because you finally see through them. The Gnostics said that awakening is not an act of violence against darkness. It is an act of remembrance. The moment you remember who you are, the illusion cracks. The Archons, who once appeared as rulers, shrink back into shadows, echoes of a dream that never truly had power over you. The greatest deception of the Demiurge was not creating matter. It was convincing humanity that it was separated from the source. Once you believe you are only a body, a social role, a passing name, you are easily ruled. But once you remember that you are a fragment of divine light experiencing this dream world, you become untouchable. That remembrance is what Gnostics called gnosis, direct knowing. Not belief, not faith, but a deep certainty that no institution or system can give or take away. When this remembering happens, the external world begins to look different. You see that suffering, while real, is not final. You begin to perceive meaning even in pain, because it becomes the fire that purifies awareness. You stop fighting against the shadows and start shining through them. The Archons feed on conflict, but they starve in the presence of peace. The Gnostics used to say that when a human reaches true serenity, 10,000 Archons flee in silence. But the question is, how do you live in that awareness in a world that constantly pulls you down? The ancient texts spoke of 3 stages. The first is awakening, the recognition that the world is not as it seems. The second is purification, observing and releasing the illusions that hold your mind captive. And the third is union, reconnecting with the divine presence that was always within you. Awakening begins with curiosity, that spark that made you question everything you were told. It's the moment you stop accepting fear as truth. Many people fear awakening because it feels like losing the world. But what you truly lose are your chains. You stop being food for the Archons because your attention, your most sacred energy, turns inward. Purification is harder. It means facing every false self you've built. The anger, the pride, the need to be right, they all rise to the surface. And yet, this is the proof that awakening is working. The illusions can only dissolve when you look at them. Every shadow brought to light loses power. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The truth is not a doctrine. It is direct awareness of your divine nature. Then comes union, the moment when you realize that the source was never far away. The light you were seeking in the heavens is the same light breathing through your chest. The kingdom of heaven, the Gnostics said, is not above the clouds. It is within and around you, invisible to those who still sleep, but clear to those who remember. When you live from that light, the Archons cannot find you, because their world of illusion no longer defines your reality. That doesn't mean life becomes easy. Even the awakened must still walk through the world of matter. But they walk differently, not as slaves of circumstance, but as witnesses of the divine in every moment. The same pain that once blinded them now becomes a teacher. The same people who once triggered them now become mirrors. Nothing is wasted, because everything is used by the light to deepen awareness. And that's the great secret the Archons tried to erase. The truth that liberation is not somewhere else, not after death, not in another realm. It begins now, in this very moment, when you choose to awaken. When you choose to live consciously, to question, to love without fear, you are doing what the ancient Gnostics risked their lives to preserve. You are breaking the cycle of generations kept in spiritual amnesia. The rediscovery of the Nag Hammadi texts was not an accident. It happened in the exact century when humanity became global, connected, and overwhelmed by noise. It was as if the earth itself whispered, "Remember, the same knowledge that destroyed generations because it threatened control is returning to rebuild consciousness." The Archons may control the outer systems, but they cannot touch the inner awakening now spreading across the world. Think about it. What if every act of kindness, every moment of awareness, every breath of gratitude is not just personal healing, but a ripple that weakens the collective illusion? What if the spiritual awakening of one person affects the consciousness of many? That's exactly what the Gnostics taught, that the divine spark is one flame reflected in billions of souls. When one remembers, the whole begins to stir. You are part of that movement, whether you know it or not. Every time you listen to teachings like this, not as entertainment, but as remembrance, you are contributing to the dissolution of the Archons' power. The world begins to shift, not when rulers fall, but when consciousness rises. And now, we reach the heart of the revelation. The Archons are not the enemy. They are the mirror. They exist so that awakening becomes possible. Without their illusion, you would have no reason to search for truth. Without their shadow, light would never recognize itself. The Gnostics never preached hatred toward the Archons. They taught transcendence, to see through them, to understand that even darkness plays its role in the great unfolding of divine wisdom. So when you feel their presence, when life becomes heavy, when confusion takes over, when despair whispers that you are alone, remember this. They only appear because your light is growing. You cannot be attacked by what you do not already surpass. You are not the victim of the Archons. You are the reason they exist. Your awakening gives their illusion purpose, and your remembrance dissolves it. At the end of every Gnostic journey comes silence. Not empty silence, but radiant peace. A peace that cannot be described because it is not something you gain. It's what remains when everything false falls away. In that silence, you realize that nothing was ever missing. The source was always breathing through you. Sophia's wisdom was never gone. The light never left. So as we close this revelation, I invite you to pause, breathe, feel the weight of centuries of forgetting lift from your shoulders. You are not the dream. You are the dreamer. You are not trapped in the world. The world is moving through you. And once you see this, truly see it, the Archons lose their power forever. If this message resonated with you, if you felt a stirring deep within your being, it means your own remembrance has already begun. Don't let it fade. Keep seeking, keep questioning, keep awakening. Because every comment, every like, every shared reflection is not just support for this channel. It's a declaration that you refuse to sleep again. It's how we, together, keep alive the memory of the hidden truths that were almost lost. So I invite you now to subscribe to this channel and join this circle of seekers. Not as followers of dogma, but as guardians of remembrance. Souls who choose to see beyond illusion, to carry the light of Sophia into a world that has forgotten itself. Leave your thoughts below. What does awakening mean to you? Have you felt the resistance of the Archons in your own life? Your words might awaken another soul who still sleeps. The search does not end here. It never does. Because truth is not a destination. It is a living flame that must be tended every day. And now that you have seen the spark, the only question that remains is, will you let it fade, or will you let it burn?